What up, guys? Today we have a question from Jack the Purple Belt. And Jack the Purple Belt sends me a message asking about drilling and its necessity to be good at jiu-jitsu. So he sends the question and says, Chewy, I've seen guys online recently say that you don't need to drill. It's not necessary and it's a waste of time. But then I see guys like you and other people talk about the importance of drilling. So my question is to you, do you think you have to drill, to drill in order to be good at jiu-jitsu? So it's a good question. And I've seen that kind of stuff before going around as well, Jack, that you don't need to drill. So first off, thanks for the question, brother. And to sort of get this one out of the way, and we'll talk more about the drilling session. As far as being good, good's very, that's an ambiguous term, good, right? That can mean a lot of different things, very vague. But I will talk about some ideas and potential benefits from drilling. And again, I can give you what has been my experience and some of the experience that I have from others that I have direct contact with. So I got my first sort of awakening with drilling and jiu-jitsu as a brown belt. So I drilled a lot in high school, and I don't know why I didn't stick with it, right? But when I drilled in high school wrestling, and then when I got to jiu-jitsu as a white belt, no one really drilled. It was like you would do a warm-up. After the warm-up, you would practice your techniques like 5 or 10 times. You do a couple techniques, and then you'd roll. And that was like, it wasn't just unique to the gym that I went to. It was pretty much, that was universal. I would every now and then do a gym trip, and that's how they train too, right? And a lot of you guys still train this way, where it's like, you do your warm-up, you practice a technique about 3 or 4 or 5 times, then you do another technique, and then you roll a little bit, right? Not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's not a great idea for training if you're actually trying to remember this stuff and develop muscle memory. So around the time I was a brown belt, I went to train with my now coach and friend, Sean Hammonds. And when I was training there with Sean Hammonds, he was at the time pumping out a lot of Pan Am champions. I wanted to figure out what he was doing because around this time, I was sort of becoming the head coach of the gym. It wasn't final. There was this transitional period, but I was like the main coach at this point. And so I needed to figure some things out for myself because, well, I need to grow, right? For myself and for my students. And also, too, I'm in my 20s. I wanted to be a good competitor at the time. That was a big focus of mine. I want to be good at this stuff. I want to be able to compete and win. So I'm going to go down there and train with Sean. He was only 3 hours away. So I go down and train with him for about a solid week, 2009. And then after that, I would go down to his gym very regularly. And I would get up at 6 in the morning at home. I would drive down to his gym, get out, start training. We would do the comp class, take a little bit of a breather. Then he would have his like sort of fundamentals class. I would do that, roll and all that other stuff. And I would leave, come back up 3 hours back home, use the techniques I was practicing down there on my students. And then later on, I would show them how to do what I was doing. But I was there and I was trying to pick out what is different. What is he doing? I mean, I was like taking it all in from listening to people, the culture that they had at the gym. And I'm like, what is it that is so special about it? These guys are cranking out really tough guys. I was thinking about the rolling. The rolling was hard, but it wasn't like that hard. It wasn't like so much harder than what we were doing back home. I was like, I'm used to this intensity. It's pretty much the same. The techniques were good, but it wasn't like I was sitting around going, oh my God, mind blown, right? Good techniques, good fundamental, strong stuff, right? The difference that I noticed was the drilling, right? When we practice a technique, we didn't practice many techniques. We practiced like one. You're getting your reps in. You'd start off slow, kind of getting a feel for it, the movement, and then you'd start speeding it up a little bit and you'd practice the movement. Then we'd do a lot of positional sparring from that position, basically sort of an active drilling session. We would work on that a lot. And that was the big difference that I wasn't implementing at that time, right? This is 2000, 2009. And so that was one of the things that I implemented. Now, following that period, I went from, it took a couple years, right? Because jiu-jitsu is not one of these things. It's like playing a create a character video game, like create a character mode. But instead of pressing a button, you have to like put in years of work, months, maybe years. And so for me, I went from being a very mediocre brown belt to eventually becoming a pretty darn good black belt. Right. And within a couple of years, I was able to win tournaments where I was winning like $1,000 or $1,500. And I'm, able to beat guys that are pretty tough. Right? I was pretty satisfied with that. And I was making improvement. Right. Sometimes I was beating guys that used to beat me. So I'm like, I'm getting better as a competitor. Right. And my students were as well. And I look back at it. I'm like, well, what was the big deal? I think it was because we started drilling. Right? We started getting the movements. Now, again, drilling can take on a lot of forms. Sometimes drilling can be something where we go very slow and we're trying to feel the mechanics out, right? We're practicing that movement. We're like getting a feel for it. Because when you're doing a technique, what are you trying to nail? You're trying to nail the feeling of it. Like, how does this thing feel? What does it feel like to do this thing correctly? And then you want to start speeding that up. Can I do the move correctly, but then still maintain that technical ability, right? Where things don't get too sloppy. They might get a little sloppy, but not too much. And then you start throwing in variables where we're going to give you an active opponent who's going to be giving you certain looks that you can now practice this move on, but they're still not resisting full speed, right? They're giving you a very specific thing that you can work on, right? All these are different active and passive drilling strategies. I wrote an ebook. It's somewhere in here. You guys get it for free if you sign up for my email list and get my daily email. There's an ebook here that goes into this stuff because I think it's one of the key strategies for blasting through sticky points into your game and also rapidly making your game better, because it's what I did. Again, that's just my experience with it. And when I have friends that we're college wrestlers, D1, NAIA, right? Tough dudes, guys that won the championships. And I asked them, do you guys drill? And they're like, oh yeah, we drill, right? A lot of times what they would do is they would do sessions where they were doing nothing but drilling. And again, the drilling could take on different levels of intensities and focuses, right? But they would drill a lot. And then they'd have full active live sessions where they go live one day. And they'd have days where they just drilled. And again, that drilling is still done in a way where they're getting a lot of good work, still a lot of times intense. Same thing for judoka, right? They do their drilling and stuff like that. And you think about a lot of other sports, they drill a lot for everything from football where they're running routes to boxing where you're just hitting pads, right? A lot of drilling involved in those things. Practicing those movements over and over again. And even the studies that they've done on motor pattern learning, like movements, right? There's really not an end on it, right? They found people that had been doing particular patterns for 20 or 30 years, and they were finding that if they kept doing it, they still got better, albeit much smaller incremental levels, but they still got better. So there's not really a ceiling that we know about where it's like, this is done. You've done this movement enough. You don't need to do it anymore. You can continue to get better. And I think that a lot of times what you guys are seeing with this whole drilling's not necessary to be good at jiu-jitsu. You can be good without drilling, right? You can definitely do it. There are people that out there that have done it, and you can be relatively good at jiu-jitsu, right? My thing is it's not necessarily necessary, but it's a pretty good idea. But I think what it really comes down to is in a lot of cases when people are trying to market a message, right? In marketing circles, there's this idea that you don't want to be the person that is delivering unwelcome news, right? That's why whenever someone's doing a marketing thing, they're never a lot of people aren't honest with you. There's some that are honest, right? I try to be an honest one with my stuff, but there's a lot of people that are not honest. I mean, think about all the friggin' workout commercials from any of you guys that grew up in the 90s. I don't know if they still do them. I don't watch TV anymore, but back in the 90s, it would be like, all you have to do is work out for 20 minutes a day and with this little ab thing. You just do this thing on your stomach and all of a sudden you're going to look like this guy, right? It's garbage. It's not true at all, right? It's like we left out dieting and there's all this other stuff you got to do, cardiovascular exercise. I mean, there's a lot of different stuff. You have to strength train to build the muscle. You're not going to look like that from doing this little doohickey on your stomach 20 minutes a day. It's not going to happen. But that doesn't sell, right? Because you don't have to deliver, hey, you want to look like this guy? Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to, diet every single day. You can get one day off or one meal off a week, but you're going to have to diet, be very mindful of your food, and then you're also going to have to do all this extra. That's not a fun message. How are you supposed to sell that, right? And then going to the other side of it, right? In jiu-jitsu circles, since I've been around, bro, there's been messages oh, get your black belt in X amount of years, right? As if, who cares who... I never wanted it that fast anyway. But then there's other things now where it's do you want to be the best at jiu-jitsu? All you got to do is follow my proven program and you can be just like me. No, you can't, right? It's a shoddy message. Everybody else, every one of us is doing our own thing. You're not going to be this person by not drilling or whatever. And even you're not going to be as good as me by just drilling. I'm just letting you know that drilling is generally not a bad idea. It's not a bad investment for your time if you do it well, right? Again, this is not being sloppy. You're not just rushing through stuff. You're trying to be very intentional about what you're doing with the movement so you can really zero in on it. One last thing, and I'll leave you with this. There is a book that I read, and I've spoken about this before, and they were talking about drilling, and they were using swimmers as an example. And they were talking to these two swimmers. and the swimmers are going, they're doing their little, like their laps and stuff like that, and they're both very good. One is like world level, the other one's like just almost there, but not quite. They talked to them and they were asking, and they found this to be true amongst other disciplines as well. They said that when they asked them, they said, okay, what are you thinking about when you're doing this repetitive movement, doing your laps, but doing this repetitive movement that you've done thousands and thousands and thousands of times? What are you thinking about? And the person that was like world level, higher level person was like, I'm thinking about how each stroke feels. I'm thinking about how each note feels when I'm playing the violin. They're thinking about how the whole thing feels and really tuning into it. Tuning into how that feels, right? Because again, we're trying to remember what it feels like to do it correctly, and then we're trying to replicate that, right? It's a feeling thing. They asked the people that were sort of at the lower end that were still very good, still put in a lot of times. In some cases, it was the exact amount or the exact same amount of time as the other people. Like, hey, what do you guys do? What are you guys thinking about? And then they're like, I don't know, just thinking about, eating lunch later or whatever, because the movements have become so repetitive, they can almost turn their brain off, right? So you can eventually do the same thing. You want to make sure that you are veering towards this end of that spectrum. When it comes time when you've done a movement tons and tons of times, you don't want to just tune out. Now, this requires a lot more thought. It requires a lot more focus. You can only do it for a much shorter period of time because, again, you're going to be mentally taxed from doing this. But this is where the skill comes from. And I can tell you also, too, when you start finding new ways to do things, it comes from this place over here. When you're tuning into how everything feels and you start to like fill out different ideas or different potential options for the movements. Some of my best techniques that I have taken from other people and then altered to be my own and made them slightly better for me and tailored them to me happened during this process. When I was drilling the move, and then I started to like fiddle around with the feeling a bit, changing grips up, things like that. That's where that happened a lot of times for me. So to answer your question, again, I think that sometimes when you're seeing these marketing messages where they're trying to sell you a product to say that you don't have to drill, you don't have to do anything uncomfortable, you don't have to put in a lot of work, all you got to do is whatever, and you'll be a black belt too. You'll be a great, not a good idea. But as far as drilling, again, you make up your own mind, Jack. But if you were asking me, you were asking the Chewster, or if you're one of my students, I would definitely nudge you in that direction because I've seen its effects both on my game, my students' games, and again, from a lot of my friends that are in both grappling sports and other disciplines, the effect it's had on them, and it's generally been a good one. So again, I would tell you that it's a pretty good idea to put some time into that. And guys, I'm finished with that long video. It's 12 minutes. It's a long one. So hopefully that helps you out. I'll talk to you guys next time.